I will call this meeting of the Transportation Committee to order. And it is December 9th, 2021, 12 noon. We're going to discuss the allocation of alternate transportation fund monies for sidewalk and traffic calming projects. And we're conducting this via Zoom because of the pandemic. First of all, we'll introduce our committee members. If the committee members will go ahead and introduce themselves.
Dave Rollo.
Steve Olin.
Kate Rosenbarger.
And Ron Smith. I'm chair at this point. The city staff, would the city staff like to introduce themselves and say what department they're from?
Valerie Rickbile, Planning and Transportation Department.
Oh, nice. Beth Rosenbarger, Planning and Transportation Department. Neil, I'll call on the next person so it helps.
Neil Copper, Engineering Department.
Roy.
Roy Ayton with the Engineering Department.
Andrew.
Andrew Seabor with Engineering.
And Jane's here. Is Jane? Jane's not going to present on this, right?
Jane Fleet, City of Bloomington Utilities Department.
Okay. All right. Thank you. So we're here to discuss the allocation of the funds and just make some decisions about the new criteria that has been developed for the sidewalk allocation. So it appears that we have $336,000 for allocations. And shall we pull up the exhibits or just forge on? Committee members.
Could I ask Ron? Could we have an update on last year's allocations and what's been done? And I'm particularly interested in Smith and Moores Pike because we did an allocation for that, but as far as I can tell, there were just walkway stripes done. And I wondered if that has been completed or so forth. So could we just have a brief overview of
Mr. Rollo, in item 4, it's an evaluation of old and new proposed projects. Do you think that will take care of that?
Sure. I mean, whatever order you want to do it in, just so we know the status. Yeah.
Okay, we're going to find that out. All right, so I'm just going to keep forging ahead. So, and we will get to that, Mr. Rollo. So let's take a look at last year's allocation, and who from the city would like to speak to the last year's allocation and look at Exhibit 4 with us? In 2021, we had $330,000 that we were working with.
Sorry, can you just share the title of the exhibit? I'm trying to find it in the packet just to know which one it is. Sorry, Chair Smith.
It's says Exhibit 4.
Chair Smith, the Exhibit 4 is the report, which does outline. It's a report of the Sidewalk Committee, which does outline what the committee, how the committee allocated the funds for 2021.
Can you pull that up for us, Heather?
Oh, I can sure try.
And show it on the screen, and then perhaps we can get Beth to kind of walk us through.
Do you?
Okay, sorry. So Exhibit 4 is the report of what happened in last year's council sidewalk committee? Is that correct? Or I think I'm confused on what you would just like information on right now, if you wouldn't mind clarifying.
Our agenda item is the review of last year's allocation.
Okay,
So I didn't know if you wanted to take a look at some of the data and then give us a review from your perspective on that.
sure. I think I would ask someone from engineering if the question is just a status report on what was approved last year and where those projects are right now, it sounds like.
Okay, sure. I think that's where we're at.
Great, thanks. Neil or Roy?
Yeah, and sorry, now I'm lost on, because I was going to do a status report under agenda item 4. Do you want me to go ahead and give status on these now?
Well, not really. I think in 4 is probably great. So we don't need to talk about the allocation now. Let's just wait till 4. Is that okay?
Okay.
All right. So we can do that in the recommendations that we looked at for 21. So let's go to item B on 3, which is we utilized a criteria for selecting sidewalk projects, and it was revised. And then there was a report on sidewalk equity improvement that we just received from Ms. Rickbeil. And can we somehow begin the discussion of how the criteria may change, and then what it was like? And then I think the committee needs to decide if we want to forge on. And then there's a choice of 2 different pathways with a new criteria that we can have a vote on, and that will help us decide which direction we're going on, which sidewalk projects to select or to recommend. So maybe is it Beth, is it Mallory that would like to go ahead and talk about the criteria?
Yeah,
Yes.
I'd be happy to talk about the criteria. As you may recall, in the sidewalk equity presentation, we created 2 expressions to highlight or to prioritize which projects were the best examples of that. And that is, of course, based on the entire sidewalk inventory, and then looking at each potential project through the same lens. And there was the demand expression, which prioritized walk potential and density, as well as some census information that we have about percentage of commuters who use transit, percentage of commuters who walk to work, and then car ownership per census block group. And then we had some information, 20%, which looked at the width and the speed limit of the streets. And then finally, the last 10% was based on equity. So we're looking at historically excluded groups, and that 10% really represented, it was basically a tiebreaker between different projects. Keeping in mind that the projects were designed to support things like transit, which disproportionately serve lower income households. And so sort of building that into the system. So I guess I don't need to go into the entire presentation. The second was the safety, where we took that street data that we have. So the width and the speeds of the roads, and we held that to the same amount as the walk potential. So each of those were, I believe, 25%. And then the 10% was the equity that remained the same.
So is that something that we should pull up? What is it, Exhibit 8? It looks like in the report, so that
Yes.
it shows, let's see, can either you or Heather pull that up, and the committee members then can just see the
Yeah.
the comparison of the new criteria pathways?
Yeah. Let me-
That was very helpful for me to look at when reading the
Okay.
report.
Let's see, sorry about this. It's just
Looks like
taking
it's
a minute.
Page 6, no, sorry, page 29 in the packet that you received.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry, what page was that?
Looks like it's page 29 that has a
Okay,
table 3 that breaks it down for us.
thank you. All right, here I am. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so these are the different expressions and how they're calculated. And there are maps that show which projects. Now, for our purposes of funding for this year, is we didn't use one or the other. We used a hybrid of both. So we took areas that there was a high demand and density on roads that were highlighted with the safety and harm reduction. And so from there, that's where you are seeing the project that is on, for example, Liberty Drive. That is coming off of 3rd Street, West 3rd Street. And so that ranks high as far as safety and harm reduction, because we know that there are greater speeds and widths, which contributes to speeding on that street, but yet the space that is around that street has a high walk potential because of destinations. And the 3 locations that we chose are all within a 5-minute walk of transit.
And so if I understand it right, Mallory, these are the 2 different directions we can take. And today the committee will need to vote on if it's expression A or expression B to give direction to city.
Well, the proposal that we as a department recommend is sort of a combination of the 2 of them. So with the amount of funding that we had for this year to select the best projects that we felt using both of these, this is kind of where these 2 expressions come together at a feasible level for 1 to 2 years worth of funding.
Okay. I understand that now. So, okay. Is there anything else that you would like to say about the new criteria before we kind of just forge on?
No.
Okay. All right. Then thank you very much.
Mhm.
And if you can unshare your screen,
Sure.
then if we can have a city representative talk about the new and old projects, and we can make sure we address Mr.
Mr.
Rollo's
Chair?
question. Yes.
Could I just, could we comment on what was just presented?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I think another consideration that bears mentioning, and maybe we do this as we go through individual projects, but the redundancy of sidewalks. So if we're in a residential area that has low traffic volume, low speeds, and we have a sidewalk across the street as opposed to, and none, say there's a sidewalk on the north side, but none on the south side, I think that we ought to consider that in terms of redundancy, because there are obviously some neighborhoods that have no sidewalks at all, or, you know, on either side of the street. And so that's something we might want to consider. You know, maybe it would be tedious to go through and find out, I suppose we could, what streets have. It would be easy filter, I guess, to find out what streets have sidewalks on both sides. But, you know, in any case, as we evaluate them, we can determine that as we go too. So I suppose either method works, but that's just something I think that bears consideration, because we don't have a lot of resources and we don't want redundancy.
Beth, did you want to comment
So
on
that's
that?
my comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rella.
Mr. Volin was first, or if it matters.
I missed Steve's hand. Yes, Mr. Volin.
Mr. Chair, I'd appreciate it if everyone were addressed in the more formal way, because it's inappropriate otherwise. And I would like to hear Ms. Rosenbarger's comment to it, but I was just going to suggest to Mr. Rallo that I think that perhaps after all the streets are evaluated through the combined formula that staff is recommending, if there are any candidates, high-ranking candidates for sidewalks that might also be redundant, we can think about it then. But I think maybe it's a little premature, because this method for sorting the priority of streets, I think, is pretty thorough. But having said that, I would like to hear staff's opinion of that question.
Thank you, Mr. Volin. Mr. Rosenbarger, would you like to have a comment on that? Oh,
yeah,
hey,
and I'll comment.
Mr. Rella, sorry.
Steve's. No. Beth first, and then I'd like to.
Again,
speak
can
about
we
Steve's
stick to
comment.
formalities here, just to be consistent? Either we need to use all first names or all
Councilman.
for. Do y'all understand what I'm talking about? You need to be appropriate. Everyone needs to be treated equally. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I was just going to respond. I think I understand the intent is about prioritizing and how best to prioritize a limited pool of funds. Just from a transportation and probably transportation movement perspective, I would say I just don't agree with the term redundancy in terms of sidewalks. Like maybe that I would say a street with a sidewalk on one side might be prioritized lower than a street with zero sidewalks, only because we don't use that same language when we're talking about streets. If there's a lane in both directions, we don't say it's redundant. I would be interested in that, but we don't currently. So just to clarify, but I believe I understand the intent, and definitely correct me if I'm wrong, that it's just about prioritizing where there are not as many sidewalks. And most likely in transportation planning, if there's not a sidewalk needed on both sides, I would question if a sidewalk is needed at all, usually because the sidewalk is providing an accessibility function, and that most often people live on both sides of the street, or there are people on both sides and destinations on both sides. So that is why we would normally say it should be on both sides. In the data set for this year, I think that is already addressed, and I could ask Ms. Rickbile to clarify. But with the data set that we have of sidewalks to create the missing and poor sidewalks layer, it doesn't differentiate if there are sidewalks on both sides or sidewalks on one side. So the data set itself, I believe, is only showing streets that have zero sidewalk or for that segment. And we don't get the detail right currently with the data we have of if it's only on one side and not the other. So that in theory should already be addressed based on the data set. And maybe I'll ask Ms. Rickbile if she can double check me on that point.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
What about neighborhoods that don't have any sidewalks? Are those made a priority?
Is that for me or?
Please go ahead.
Yeah.
Sure.
Staff.
I would say it really just depends on the context. So it's about the particular street context and the number of destinations. So if we were to look at let's say a block had a very low density neighborhood with narrow streets that are likely slow, it's not on the neighborhood level, the rankings. So it is just on the street context level of destinations and characteristics of that street as to the prioritization of sidewalk for that street. So I think that there's not a sum of the neighborhood taken into account. Thanks.
If I
Thank you.
can,
Okay. I think that's kind of a failing. Yeah, go ahead, Mallory.
we do have an indicator for census block group that isn't a part of the priority, but it's something that we looked at, which is percentage of missing sidewalks as a percentage of streets. And then that has been mapped from, this is a newer data set, so it's not something that was in the presentation, but we do have sort of a heat map based on census block group of missing sidewalks, basically density as it
What about
related.
Mallory? So let me give you a specific.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
I'm sorry. Yes. Did I?
Yes, Mr. Vola.
I don't know how long this meeting was scheduled to last. I see a long agenda before us. I'm not even sure what point we are at on the agenda. I do know that I have an obligation that causes me to leave in less than 20 minutes. And so I'm not really sure what the committee is expecting to do here, but I would like to stick to the order of the agenda. I think Mr. Ralla's questions are appropriate for later in the agenda or perhaps for a later meeting. But I thought that the point here was just to sort of lay out the staff presentation. Am I correct in that, or can you tell us what point
We're
at in the
on
agenda?
number 4. We're kind of in number 3, headed towards number 4. Shall we just move on to number 4 so that we can?
We're talking about criteria, are we not?
Yes.
And so this is
we are.
relevant criteria. I don't. Where would you like me to speak about criteria?
I didn't know where we were in the agenda, which is why I had to ask.
I think we are in the right
Yeah.
area for criteria.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
So this, I'll make this really brief, and that is that, in Councilmember Smith's district, Morningside Drive is a street that is, receives a lot of traffic because it essentially people drive to Morningside to get out of their subdivision. And so that has a higher traffic volume, and there were no sidewalks on the streets whatsoever. Now, some of those streets probably don't need them because they have low traffic volume. But there are some neighborhoods like that that have no sidewalks, but yet people walk those neighborhoods. So how do we evaluate those neighborhoods?
And how does that show up in the criteria?
Yeah, if it doesn't, the volume, the density is the density of the entire, or one could approach density by looking at the entire neighborhood and saying, a fair number of those people walk, and so they're going to be using maybe one particular street to walk on that they must. How do we capture that? It seems to me that we need to think about neighborhoods without any sidewalks and find out at minimum what we can deliver.
for that kind of scenario, Ms. Rosenbarger or Ms. Rick Bile, for that kind of scenario, what can you give us an idea of what the data is going to show us and what that means?
Sure. So from a planning perspective, Morningside Drive is designated as the preferred facility is a neighborhood greenway, which would have traffic calming to support, I believe, the desired speed limit of 15 miles per hour. And greenway facilities cost significantly less than sidewalk facilities. And so from our perspective, the tool that we would use for creating that walkable environment and responding to that connectivity in that area, I suppose I disagree that the sidewalk would be the best tool considering the other projects that we have on streets such as College, West 3rd, East 3rd.
Mr. Rao? Yeah.
I'm not sure I follow comparing Morningside with East 3rd Street. But go ahead, sorry.
Well, so the new criteria proposes looking at the entire city in terms of with the bucket of $336,000. If that's the only bucket, where are sidewalks needed the most and where will they get used the most? And those are probably the up for debate questions of what does it mean to be needed the most and what does it mean to be serving the most. And what we've put together is a set of data to propose those answers, and that whether a neighborhood currently has sidewalks or not is still looking at the entire city and saying, where do people need to get to be? And where are there missing sidewalks preventing them from having an accessible route to get there? Sometimes that might be in a neighborhood that doesn't have a sidewalk anywhere in the neighborhood. Sometimes it might be on a larger street that's missing a gap. I think it's still just based on need. If there was like a similar, well, I'll stop there. Yes.
I suppose some of it comes from anecdote. I mean, council members will go into their districts and find out what the need is. And then, because it's a little difficult to evaluate, I understand, but I think that there needs to be some prioritization for neighborhoods that don't have any sidewalks, that elevate them somehow, Anyway.
Is there, I'm going to ask that Ms. Rickbile or Ms. Rosenbarger, is there any, how do you respond to that where about if this neighborhood doesn't have any sidewalk, does that have a special emphasis then for our prioritization? Does our criteria take that into account so that they may then acquire sidewalks?
Shall I start?
Please do.
Okay. Just want to check with Mr. File. I would say no. It's really, I'm going to try to do a lawyerly thing and take an argument to an extreme. Let's say a neighborhood had 5 people in it, but the entire neighborhood has no sidewalks. It might say then there are a lot of street miles with no sidewalks, so this neighborhood could benefit from having sidewalks. That is correct. The people would benefit, but there's another 1 block and 100 people live there, and it has connecting sidewalks, but that one piece is missing. So yes, that's an extreme way of doing it, but that is what we're doing with population density data, with destination density data, and just trying to look at, with this pot of money, how can the sidewalk serve the highest number of people? And from an equity perspective, how can it serve a transportation function first, where people don't have a choice of honestly what mode they're taking? And so if we start with transportation, we know we will be serving more people and that it is serving an equity purpose as opposed to, I guess, a leisure walk, which is we want people to take leisure walks. We want people to walk recreationally for sure, but we know that we have to start with the transportation walk if somebody is getting somewhere. And the way we're proposing doing that is looking at, among the other criteria, population density, population data, destination density. And it still comes down to how does a space score with those metrics, because with the best we can, we want to serve the greatest number of people.
Thank you. Let's get Miss Kate Rosenbarger in the conversation. You're on.
Thank you. Happy to be able to be here on video. I haven't spoken yet, of course, so I just want to say, like, I think this criteria is really detailed, and I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. I would love to see something like this from other departments when we're talking about allocating money. What I hear you all saying is Councilmember Rallo's concerns are addressed in this criteria. It's just not exactly spelled out in the same words that Councilmember Rallo is using. I mean, if we want to talk about anecdotes, I would say, you know, I run and walk all over the place, mostly recreationally on the run. You know, I feel safe as can be on Allen Street. It is a greenway, right? And it has the speed humps, and it has the, I don't know what you call them, those things that for the parking spots that pop out a little bit. Super safe. Like door knocking on 11th Street in my district. There's a sidewalk there, I think only on one side of the street. You all can correct me if I'm wrong there. I feel super unsafe there because cars drive probably at 40 miles an hour. There's no green space in between that sidewalk. And I mean, I can't tell you how many times cars, their side mirrors almost hit my body on that sidewalk. And I know that pedestrians die like that. So I definitely can see that it's kind of, I think you all are taking in so much here. And so I really appreciate that. Like, especially, I mean, I think some of you haven't talked about the idea of like a sidewalk on one side, so who needs a sidewalk on the other? But I think, Ms. Rigbile, a meeting we were recently in, this exact topic was brought up about preferred paths. And you talked about folks needing to cross the street then 2 or 3 times to get to a sidewalk, to get to a bus stop. And like, that is so dangerous because then they're crossing at areas that have like no crosswalks, no stop signs, right? And it could be on a street with like high traffic speeds, high traffic volumes. I mean, I think we were talking, I think one example you showed was Patterson. I think it's been maybe a month since you presented that, but something over here in that area. Okay, so I mean, just kind of, I guess, correct me if I'm wrong. I get the impression that is taken into account here.
Well, I don't think so because but I think that it could be accommodated. I think this is where anecdotes come in. I think that council members.
Point of order, I was addressing city staff here, and I don't know, like, are we allowed to just speak out of turn?
I thought you mentioned my name, Kate, so I was responding to what you said. Again,
Can we please use formalities?
Councilmember Rosenberger, you were addressing whether it covered what I brought up, and I don't think it does, but.
City staff want to comment? Yeah,
yeah,
sure. City staff want to have a comment on that?
I'm gonna ask Ms. Rigbile if you have if you can add more about the method.
Does it address Mr. Rallo's concerns and to Ms. Kate Rosenberger's point?
With the new system, we're using to create the map of like what projects are looked at. We're looking at the entirety of the city. So all projects, so all spaces, all roads are looked at through the same level of criteria, and the and the data that we're using with demand and with potential users and with safety, and then the equity, we're be able to visualize which projects are the highest ranking, and so we're kind of using that as the map to kind of help us to plot a course for our transportation and our comprehensive plan goals. And the anecdotal, that aspect, very important part of this, but that helps to for us to understand the contours of what is happening. And so I think the big thing for us is to keep in mind when we are using solely the approach of anecdotal evidence, that that is really that's to help us to understand the context and things that we can do to help build connectivity towards the system. But when it comes to allocating money for new sidewalk projects, the amount of data that we have will help us to highlight those spaces that otherwise we wouldn't be able to see, and the things that aren't coming to us otherwise.
If I may, one of my readings of this and with this process of it tended to, and I think rightly so, objectify the selection criteria, and I think it does it does decrease the importance of anecdotal information, and I kind of thought that was a really good idea. And that was just, this is my personal opinion, that it just seemed like that was the direction that that was good to do. We're factoring in social equity and so not that your point, Mr. Rollo, isn't important, but I think that was what was going on with the criteria, was making it more objective.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, just to say that I'm all for objectivity and data, but there are neighborhoods without sidewalks completely. There are no sidewalks because they weren't prioritized when when this neighborhood built out. Certainly we have to pay attention to density, but I guess what I'm saying in terms of an anecdotal evidence is that if you visit a neighborhood and people say, we would like to walk and say, walk out of our neighborhood, and there are no sidewalks, but there is a collector street that, and this is very common in suburbs where, everything kind of, points in toward a collector. And that would be a really good candidate for a sidewalk, because then we could take that to, some other street where there are sidewalks and we can walk. And I don't know if I want to distinguish between, I understand that people need to get around for goods and services, but people also need to exercise. And I think that that's an important part of why we have sidewalks. So the leisure component, it sounds kind of diminished when you say leisure, but people do get out and visit each other, and people do exercise, and I think that's an important component. So I think, anyway, this is good discussion. Thanks. I'd like to examine neighborhoods without sidewalks and have those included at some point, and then kind of evaluate at some point, if conditions arise for sidewalk to be implemented there. Maybe not on every street, maybe just on a single street that could accommodate hundreds of people, not just 5 people.
I'm going to ask Mr. Rollo a question then. Do you have specific areas in the city that you're thinking of that perhaps you can send that information to us all, so that we know which sidewalks, which neighborhoods or areas have no sidewalks, and that can be kind of noted?
Yep. And I think they occur in every district but District 6.
Okay, I think that would be great to do that. And I think Ms. Beth Rosenbarger and Ms. Rick Bile would be happy to hear that, right? Yeah.
Terrific. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, that was good discussion and criteria. So we're ready to move on. Thank you very much for that discussion on the criteria. Evaluation.
Mr. Chair, sorry,
Yes,
can I add a response real quick?
please do.
Thank you. So yes, if we agree with prioritizing streets that will serve the most number of people and at the same time improve safety for the most number of people and the highest number of people. And that is like a collector street or a neighborhood connector, a main street, an urban, I forget what we call it, a general urban street. So we definitely agree with that. I do want to say there's no way for us to account for, in this neighborhood, there's the greatest number of missing sidewalks, and for us to rank that as and be promoting the most good. So by that, or improving safety the most. If we want to improve safety the most for the highest number of people, I support the method that Ms. Rick Bile has proposed. If we want to prioritize places where there aren't currently sidewalks, it's just a different approach, but we can't say that those two can happen at the same time to promote safety for the greatest number of people, because what she's proposing is doing that. I want to clarify that the data set we've used is missing and poor sidewalks, and that is about there not being sidewalk on either side of the street. So it does capture that. And then I think I'm struggling a little because this was presented to the Council Transportation Committee several months ago and to the entire council, I don't like a month or two ago. So it is a challenge to incorporate like major changes. It would be a real challenge for staff to do that right now. So I'm definitely happy to be having this discussion and what should be considered. It's a little challenging to know how to incorporate something when it has been discussed at several meetings, and it's the end of the year for this one, but happy to discuss. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Rallo, go ahead.
I'm not suggesting that we do it this round. So I appreciate the effort that you've made and the criteria you developed. I think in terms of missing sidewalks, it would probably, if we had we have maps that show every sidewalk in the city. And so we can evaluate areas that are missing them, and then we can explore those later. So I think that's probably maybe the way to go.
Thank you, Mr. Rallo.
Thank you.
All right, let's have a discussion of in point 4 in our agenda, evaluation of old and new proposed projects. Perhaps this is Mr. Copper, that we can talk about recently completed and ongoing sidewalk projects. And you can walk us through the rest of it.
Yeah, happy to give a quick update, and I'll try to be brief, but let me know if there are questions. So projects that saw progress in the past year. So Maxwell Street between Miller and Short, that was sidewalk on the east side of the street. That construction is complete. Go out and take a look if you haven't. You'll notice at the very southern end, there's development ongoing. So there's still a little gap that the developer is required to install. Sidewalk on West 14th Street between Madison and Woodburn. That's the north side of the street there. That sidewalk is constructed and in place. Go take a look. As Councilmember Rallo noted, we did construct crosswalks at the intersection of Morris Pike and Smith. There's painted crosswalks on the street, and we had to install curb ramps in order to have ADA compliant crosswalks there. So that is complete. And then projects that are ongoing now, we have Dunn Street between 14th and 15th. That's the west side of the street. That project is in design. That was listed as the top priority for the current year's funding. We have the South Walnut Sidewalk, that is out to bid for construction. That's between Winslow and Ridgeview on the east side of the street. Bids are due in, I don't know, a week and a half or something. So we don't know final price on that yet, but we will shortly. The Adams Street sidewalk from Kirkwood to Fountains, the west side of Adams there, that is in design. We have applied for community crossing matching grant fund, or sorry, not community crossing, community development block grant funding for that project. We won't know yet whether or not the project receives funding, but that would be a great opportunity to match some of the committee's funding for that. And the traffic calming was the priority 4 list for this year's current year's funding. We did, Ms. Rickbile could explain the process that we went through, but we did select and prioritize traffic calming in the Crestmont neighborhood, 12th Street and 13th Street. That project has been, construction has been bid and awarded already. I'll say it's unlikely that any of the committee's funding from this year will actually make it into that project because of the higher ranked projects are probably going to need the funding. So just a quick big picture look, and I think table 2 on page overall page 27 of the packet gives kind of an estimate of these the costs for the current year's funding. Again, many of these.
Could we pull that up? Ms.
Sure.
Lacy or Mr. Copper, can you just pull that up so we can see it?
And Ms. Lacy, are you able to do that, or?
What page was that, Mr. Copper?
27 of the PDF.
Or exhibit?
It's on page 27. Yeah, I'm just following along over here too.
While that comes up, I'll just emphasize that these are estimates at this point. Again, we don't have bids back. And one of the main things that I would like to talk about here is just kind of shifting funding around between those projects here at the end of the year. So we have the priorities from the last time, which is very helpful. Dunn Street Sidewalk, we are expecting to actually reduce the amount that's currently towards that design contract. We were originally anticipating that there would be right-of-way acquisition and right-of-way services. We don't think that's necessary. So the amount of money needed for Dunn Street will probably go down a little bit from what's shown here in the table. South Walnut Street Sidewalk, we are expecting that to go up. It's a tough bidding climate right now. Part of that's materials, part of that's labor. But we've been seeing high prices on a lot of our projects. And it's a very real possibility that actually some of the 2022 funding will need to go into the Walnut Street sidewalk. So we are basically would like to put as much as we can from the current year's funding into South Walnut Street, assuming that we get good bids back. Adams Street sidewalk, we put at the moment we've put a partial encumbrance into there. We've done enough of the funding there so that we can keep the design going, but we didn't put in enough to get in through all of the right-of-way services because it's listed as a lower priority. And then traffic calming we haven't put any money into. So just kind of the summary there is, you know, the committee's allocations from last year, they have some stipulations on how much money can be moved and the approvals required for it. Basically anything requires the whole committee, I think, to approve it. It just typically goes through the chair, and then a larger shift requires the committee, I think, to actually meet and vote.
Right.
If the committee is comfortable, I think, you know, I don't know if you'd be able to vote today or make a recommendation. I don't know if it's an official vote to be able to make that kind of funding shift so that those projects can be encumbered and use all the funding from this year.
Do I remember right, Mr. Copper, that the chair has the authority upon consultation with the committee members if it's $40,000 or less for the project?
That sounds right, 40 or 45, somewhere in there. We would potentially be shifting more than that into South Walnut Street. So it may require the next kind of level of approval.
Okay.
And that's if the committee wants to. We don't, I honestly don't know why you wouldn't, but if for some reason you decide you don't want to put money into that project, then you don't have to.
Thank you. And I know there was a question earlier that we were wondering how much out of the 336,000 that we have for this year, how much we were going to need for prior projects. Do you have an estimate on that?
Unfortunately, we won't really know that for a couple more weeks because that will largely depend on what the bids for South Walnut look like.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Rollo.
Mr. Copper, could you just clarify? So regarding, I brought up earlier it's actually connectivity. I don't know how it's evaluated in previous year's budget, but for Smith and Morse Pike, there was a sidewalk west of Smith on the north side, east of Smith on the south side, and the idea was to connect that by crosswalks and I guess curb. Did you say bump outs or right? Did you say curbs? Curbs are put in?
Curb ramps.
Curb ramps. Could you, sorry, how much was allocated?
How much was allocated to that project?
Yeah, a little bit of microphone issue, Mr. Rollo.
Yeah, and how much did it cost? Sorry.
So in 2020, council allocated $28,000. The design was $9,680 and the construction ended up being $33,650.
$33,000 that's incredible. So striping and putting curbs cost $33,000. Okay, I'm just trying to wrap my head around the cost of things. That's amazing. Okay.
All right.
Thank you.
Any other council members have questions for Mr. Copper about the old and new projects? Okay, do we have any disclosures of conflicts of interest from anyone? No. And so the last item on this is to discussion of sidewalk priorities.
Your call cannot be completed as dialed. Please check the number and dial again.
So I was wondering, Ms. Lacy?
Mr. Chair, I am wondering if perhaps the committee is maybe going to need to consider revising its current criteria for evaluation. So we heard today from Planning and Transportation their proposed criteria for prioritizing projects, and you all did discuss that, but at some point, I think the committee, if it's the committee's will to utilize the new criteria, the committee would need to vote to do so. And
Okay.
it may be with the information the committee wishes to wait until its next meeting to take that vote and then review the prioritization based on whatever criteria the committee chooses to go forward with.
Okay, so if I understand right, the prioritization list that we have in this packet, that is with the new criteria. Do I understand that correctly?
Included in your packet, and it is page 22 of the packet materials, Exhibit 6. On page 22 is the chart that tells how the committee has been ranking projects up until this point. And Planning and Transportation has given the presentation for revised objective criteria, where they gave the presentation to the committee several months ago and then to the full council. The committee would need to decide whether it prefers continuing with its current criteria or utilizing the revised criteria that Planning and Transportation, Ms. Rickbeil and Ms. Rosenbarger have presented.
Okay, I would entertain some discussion on that from the committee members. Do the committee members wish us to go forward with using the new criteria that was developed? And I will entertain some discussion on that. Ms. Kate Rosenbarger.
Thanks. I would like to use the new criteria. I think it's a lot better than where we were, and appreciate all the work that Ms. Rickbeil put into it. I think it all makes a lot of sense for how to decide how to allocate this small budget based on equity and safety. So I would like to use it for them, however we talk about criteria.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rallo, you would like to opine on that?
Yes, I'm good with the criteria. Can you hear me? I'm good with the criteria, with the caveat that we also evaluate redundancy. And I think I've already explained my view that if we have, we don't have much in the way of a budget and we want it to go far. And so if there are sidewalks on both sides of the street, one side of the street, and it's a calm street, then I think that it diminishes the need significantly. So taking that into account, I'm comfortable with adopting these criteria.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I'm very comfortable with the new criteria. I think was a really great, fantastic job. A lot of great work by Ms. Rickbeil, and I really thank you for that. It was a lot of work, I know. So I will entertain a motion for us to accept the new criteria.
I make the motion.
Second.
All right, I will ask for a vote. I will call on Ms. Kate Rosenbarger.
Yes.
Mr. Rallo.
Yes.
And this is Mr. Smith, and I will say yes. So that will pass. And I guess it's passing 3, 1 absent, 3, 4, 1 absent. So I appreciate Ms. Lacey keeping us on track on that. Yes, Ms. Beth Rosenbarger, did you have a comment?
I apologize. I have to leave, but I'm happy
Okay.
to stay longer next time. Sorry about that. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Well, I think that was Ms. Lacey. That was what we really needed. We needed to get that accomplished today.
And it may be that the committee wishes to take up the other items on the agenda at its next meeting, with the exception of matters of scheduling the next meeting. It sounds like Mr. Copper may have additional information following the receipt of the outstanding bid, which may inform the committee's decision-making. Mr. Copper, do I understand that you think you might have that in the next 2 weeks?
That's correct. I also want to add in that currently with the allocations for this year's funding, shifting as much funding as we can into the South Walnut Street construction as I had proposed would require approval by the committee because the chair can only approve up to a $45,000 shift. So options as I see them as it's currently laid out, we can just allocate whatever we can and some of the funding will go unused. Or we can allocate and shift up to $45,000 if Chair Smith approves it, or if the committee approves either a larger shift or granting that authority to Mr. Chair Smith upon his review, a larger shift, then we could have more flexibility to ensure that we actually use all of this year's funds.
Committee members, do you have any comments on that? Yes, Mr. Rollo.
Oh, I was just trying to expedite this. I don't know enough about it, so I'd like to make a motion that we give permission to Chair Smith to evaluate and make the necessary shifts of funding for the South Walnut Street project.
All right, I guess we need a second.
If you're willing to do it.
Sure, I am. Ms. Kate Rosenbarger, do you want to do a second?
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, then I will, that is the resolution or the vote, is that specific enough for you, Mr. Copper? Once we vote on it?
That sounds great to me. And then we would just coordinate with you before any of those shifts happen.
Okay, then I'll take a roll vote. Mr. Rollo?
Yes.
Ms. Rosenbarger?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. So that authority then, in consultation with Mr. Copper, I will work with him to make sure that that's done in an efficient manner. Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. Copper. All right, so if I'm understanding right, Ms. Lacy, the next thing we need to do is just, do we tentatively set another meeting in a few weeks when Mr. Copper then will have the rest of that information? Okay, do we want to set a date right now, or are you going to hear from Mr. Copper first before we set a date? What would be most expeditious?
I guess I would ask Mr. Copper if he has a sense for when the numbers will be available.
So that we can have another meeting.
I think in about 2 weeks, we will probably have numbers available. I think many staff are going to be out. That's they're talking about the last 2 weeks of December. So it might be a early January, it might be safer. And at that time, we would definitely have numbers to you before then.
Okay, and is this time okay for other committee members? Okay, Ms. Lacy, if you can look on our calendar and propose a date and send it out to us, something similar noon on a Thursday.
January 6th is a Thursday at noon, from noon to 1.
Does that sound okay to committee members? Okay. That sounds okay to you too, Mr. Copper? Okay, thank you. All right, let's see. Do we have anything else to conclude? That looks like I think we've ended our work today. Ms. Lacy, did we get it all done?
Not quite. I think we have more items that that are on the agenda that will need to appear on the agenda for the January 6th meeting, which
Right.
I think that the committee then will have the information it needs to be more informed about what projects are still needing to be completed.
Right, exactly. And so for today, I think we've concluded our business.
Yes.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for all your good discussions. And I hereby say this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.